In this video, we're going to have a look at task 2 from the first sample assessment for credit and debt management. So this is about credit ratings and analysing performance indicators. So we're told that JT Limited is a manufacturer of electric bicycles which uses a credit rating system to assess the credit status of new customers. The credit rating or scoring system is used to assess the risk of default by calculating key indicators and comparing them to the table and calculating an aggregate score. The sales department has asked for a credit limit of $45,000 to be given to Top Bikes Limited, a potential new customer. The financial statements have been supplied by Top Bikes Limited. The credit control manager has calculated the performance indicators for 20x0 and then asked you, the credit control assistant, to calculate the indicators for 20x1 and then complete the credit scoring for both years for Top Bikes. So it tells us also the credit rating system and the financial statements from Top Bikes are set out in the reference sections to the right. So in the exam software, you could open these as separate windows. So for the purpose of our video here, we've just reproduced them further below. So on the left-hand side, there's our credit scoring system, which is one separately open document in the exam software. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the financial statements. So we've got their profit or loss, and then our statement of financial position. And then these are separately openable in the exam software. So we're asked to complete the table below. So in this table, then we need to work out the rating, the performance measure, the ratio for the current year. They've given us the prior year already, so we don't need to do that. But then based on the scores that we work out here, we can then use the table to work out how well they did before. And then we can also work out the rating for the prior year as well. So the first one we have then is the operating profit margin. So let's have a look at that. The operating profit margin is our operating profit divided by our revenue. So in this case, we've got an operating profit of 756 and we divide by 5,040, and that gives us 15%. So we can put that into our table. It's asking to 2 decimal places. So it's important that you follow the instructions, because remember, a computer is going to be marking this, and if you don't follow the instructions, then the computer will simply not give you a mark. Okay, so that's our operating profit margin. Let's look next at our interest cover. So interest cover is the profit before interest and taxes. Remember, it's before, that's a mistake that people often make. So it's the profit before we've paid the interest divided by our interest. So if we look at our statement of profit and loss, we can see there's the 2 numbers are ringed. So we have our profit of 756 and we divide by the interest that we need to pay. And that gives us an interest cover of 17.58. So that means that we have enough profit to be able to cover the interest 17 times, which is pretty good. That sounds like a good number. So again, to 2 decimal places, that's 17.58. Okay, next we have the current ratio. The current ratio is the current assets divided by the current liabilities. And we're trying to identify whether we have enough assets that will hopefully become cash in the next year to be able to pay off our liabilities, which are due within the next year. So in this case, we have our current assets of 2,242, and then our current liabilities, let's just scroll down a little bit. Our current liabilities have a total of 1,350. So if we put those 2 numbers into our answer, so we have 2,242 divided by 1,350. So that gives us a current ratio of 1.66. Again, that's to 2 decimal places because that's the requirement in the exam software. So this is greater than 1, so that looks like a good thing. And then finally, we have to work out the gearing. There are lots of different ways of calculating gearing, but the one that AAT wants you to use is debt divided by debt plus equity. So we have our debt figure of 1,020, and then our equity is 2,070. So for our gearing, we have the 1,020 as the numerator, and then we're dividing by the 1,020 plus the equity. So remember, on the denominator, debt plus equity, that's all the various source of funding for the business. So we're getting funded from bank loans and also funded by the owners. They've put in their equity, and we're trying to work out what is the proportion of this that's forming debt. And if this is a very big number, we'd be quite worried by that. So in this case, we have a gearing position of 33.01%. So let's put that into our answer. Okay, so we've done the calculations. The next step then is using the table, again, that's also available to us in the exam software. What's the credit rating for this? So to help us to do this, let's just move some of the text around a little bit so we can see it all on one screen. So let's look at our operating profit margin. So last year we had an operating profit margin of 20%. And if we look at our credit scoring system on the right-hand side, if we have an operating profit margin of 20% or more, then we would have a credit score of 20. Whereas in the current year, we have a margin of 15%, and with a score of between 10 and 20, that would give us a credit rating of 10. What about interest cover? So last year we had interest cover of 10.4. And if we look at the table on the right hand side, so if we have an interest cover of 4 or more, then that gives us a score of 10. And this year we have an interest cover of 17, so that's going to give us a score of 10 as well, isn't it? What about our current ratio? So our current ratio last year was 1.44. Again, looking at the table, so that's between 1.25 and 1.5. So that gives us a score of 0. But it does improve, doesn't it? In the current year, it becomes 1.66. So that's going to increase our score to 10. And then for gearing, so last year we had 42%. So 42% would give us a score of 10. And then in the current year we have 33%. So that's in the same boundaries. That's going to be a score of 10 as well. So now we can work out our totals. So last year we have a total of 40. And then this year we have a total of 40 as well. So we need to decide now, can we accept this or not? So again, looking at the table, we can see that a score of 40 would be between 60 and 21, and that would consider to be very low risk. And on that basis, we would choose to accept the proposal for their credit score and their credit available, so they can get the 45,000 that they asked for. So let's move on to part C now. The sales department of JT Limited have now asked if an existing credit customer, Jupiter Cycling, can have an increase in their credit limit from 18,000 to 30,000, which they have requested. Existing customers who request an increase in their credit limit are asked to provide their most recent financial statements, which JT Limited then use to calculate and analyse performance indicators. Jupiter Cycling currently receives credit terms of 60 days and have provided their financial statements for the past 2 years. The credit control manager has calculated several key performance indicators for Jupiter. She's asked you, the credit control assistant, to complete the calculations for 20X1 and provide a brief analysis of the performance indicators. The credit control manager will then use this information to make a decision about whether to increase Jupiter Cycling's credit limit. So what we need to do is calculate the performance indicators for 20X1 to 2 decimal places. So again, remember to follow the instructions in the question. So we need to work out the gross profit margin, return on capital employed, quick ratio, and trade payables payment period. So let's scroll down to have a look at the information. So we've just squeezed the financial statements onto the screen here, but this would be available as a sort of a separate window in the exam software. So we need to start off with the gross profit margin. So gross profit is gross profit divided by revenue. So we've got our gross profit of 927. And then we divide by our revenue of 3,172, and that gives us a profit margin of 29.22%. Remember, we need to express our answer to 2 decimal places. So we can see that the gross profit margin has fallen slightly from the previous year, and we need to do our analysis. So we can see that it's deteriorated. But then we need to decide, well, why is it deteriorated? Is it due to a decrease in selling prices or an increase in cost of sales? Or is it due to better control over operating expenses? Okay, so let's have a look at our financial statements again. So it's suggesting it could be an issue because our selling price has gone down, or because we have controlled our cost of sales better, or the other answer was because we've had some control over our operating expenses. Well, do you see that the operating expenses appears below the gross profit line, so that's not relevant. So it could be because either the selling price has changed or we've got better control over our cost of sales. So it's going to be the middle option is the correct answer. Next then, let's have a look at our return on capital employed. So return on capital employed is our operating profit. And in this case, we can see we have a figure of 229, and we want to divide that by our capital employed, and that's all the funding provided either internally or externally. So our internal capital is our equity, 1117, and then the external provided capital will be our borrowings, which will be 1120. So overall we have a return of 10.24%. So to 2 decimal places, 10.24, and we can see that has also fallen from the previous year. So again, we need to decide which of the possible answers is correct. So yes, it's deteriorated, so it's either the second or third. But what is the cause of this? So due to higher operating profit, or a lower amount of capital employed, or due to a lower operating profit or a higher amount of capital employed. Well, we know that it's gone down, and again, looking at the formula, so it's asking us, what's happening here? Has the operating profit either gone up or down, or the capital employed either gone up or down? But we know overall it's gone down, so it must be that either the numerator has gone down or the denominator has gone up, and that's going to cause the overall fall. So next we need to look at the quick ratio. The quick ratio, sometimes called the acid test ratio, will be our current assets, although ignoring inventories because they take a long time to turn into cash. So it's going to be a combination of our receivables, so that's the 455, plus our cash of 64. And then we want to compare that with how much we have in our current liabilities. So we're trying to identify how well can we pay off those current liabilities. So we've got the 455 plus 64 and divided by 682. So that gives us a quick ratio 0.76. So we can pop that into our answer, 0.76. So we can see that it's got worse. We have fewer assets to be able to use to pay off our liabilities. So we can see that it's either the first or the second answer, but why? So it's deteriorated, which means there is more risk that Jupiter Cycling cannot meet its short-term debts, or it's deteriorated but Jupiter Cycling still has sufficient liquid assets to meet its current liabilities. Well, no, in this case there is more risk Yeah, so we don't have enough liquid assets to be able to pay off our liabilities because this figure is less than 1. And finally, we need to deal with our trade payable days. Payable days is calculated by taking our payables figure and dividing by our credit purchases figure. But we're not given that in this question, so it's normal that we would replace that with our cost of sales. So we have our payables figure of 644, and we divide by our cost of sales of 2245, and then multiply by 365. So that gives us 104.70 days. So yeah, it's quite a long time before we pay our suppliers. So we can put that answer in, so 104.70. So we can see that that has increased. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? So that's quite judgmental. But in this case, we are taking longer to pay our suppliers, and that would be considered a negative thing because we may upset those suppliers. At the same time, if we paid them too quickly, that would be a deterioration as well. But in this case, we're going from quite a long period to an even longer period. So I think we can conclude that this is a deterioration. So why? So deterioration, but it's still within the credit terms currently offered to Jupiter. And deterioration, which suggests that Jupiter Cycling could be struggling to pay the credit suppliers. Well, what are our credit terms? We've offered them 60 days, haven't we? So this is clearly worse than what we would expect them. And therefore, the second answer is the correct one here. So looking at part D then, so complete the following statement. So should we accept or reject? So if JT Limited's primary concern is cash flow, the request for increasing the credit limit for Jupiter Cycling should be, well, we can see that there's a bit of a theme, isn't there? That there's a deterioration, 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 and deterioration. So no, this should be rejected.